Um, so thank you, Michelle, for having us. As Michelle said, my name is Heather. I'm a Heather Slesser dairy educator out of the Marathon County office, serving both Marathon and Clark County. And Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Matt Lippert. So I think there's like nine of us dairy educators when we're fully staffed in the state. But Heather and I are both in central Wisconsin. In fact, we overlap. So I'm a dairy educator in Marathon, Clark, and Wood counties.
So Michelle asked us to talk with you guys a little bit about what it's like to be a dairy farmer. So the way we structured it is first we're going to talk to you a little bit about the typical day. And then we're going to get into the different dairy enterprises because, as you can imagine, they're not all the same. They have a lot of differences to them. And then we left time at the end for you guys to ask questions if you had any. So the first thing we have here is a video that is hopefully going to play here for you.
We're crazy farmers. We're Ryan and Lindsay Prawl, Granite View Farm LLC. We still operate as considered a partnership with my parents. From day-to-day operations, we're the managers.
We have about 700 acres that we're cropping, and then we have
150 dairy cattle and about 140 heifers.
on a typical morning, we will wake up about 4:30 in the morning. We get ourselves dressed and ready to go, and we head on out to the milk house. In the milk house, we set up our piping system that pipes directly into our milk tank, which is where we store all of our milk from that day. We go ahead then and we start up all of the machinery associated with the milking system and the milking process. We turn on the lights, we fill dippers, we get towels ready to clean off our cows. Cleanliness is really important in the milking process. Then we go in and we fetch our animals from the freestall barn. We bring them into the milking parlor, and then we proceed to run our milking procedure, which is dipping them with a pre-dip. Then we do what's called stripping them. That's where we check to make sure that the quality of the milk is what we want to see going into our tank. Then we go to wiping the cows with a clean towel, and then we put on our milkers. The cow is milked with the milkers, and then it has what's called an automatic takeoff. So the machine takes off the milker when the cow is done milking.
After you're done milking, you post-dip them.
And that's the milking process.
You do clean up, wash up in the milk house, wash up in the parlor, clean holding area. You gotta go out and take care of calves, feed them water, grain, and milk, depending upon their age. And then most of the rest of the day is filled with jobs around the farm. A lot of seasonal jobs include planting and harvesting, obviously. Planting in the spring, summer harvest of hay, fall harvest of corn and beans.
Calving is all year round for dairy, for most dairy farmers, including us. We calve our animals all year round, but seasonally there are larger flushes in the spring and fall typically on the animal side.
I enjoy feeding cows. I enjoy watching my crops grow. I do enjoy that thoroughly.
I enjoy when I get to look at a report from testing our cows and we have a high butter fat, or, I enjoy seeing healthy calves, and I enjoy seeing healthy heifers coming into the barn with great components and a lot of milk, and I know that they're happy. One of farmers' deepest desires are to produce a quality, healthy product for consumers to enjoy. Consumer trust in farmers really is important to farmers in order to continue to produce the products that you are able to enjoy.
The rewarding thing is being able to raise my kids, show them how to work, be able to work with my wife, even though some days we don't get along.
Yeah.
But I think the most rewarding thing at the end of the day is family, raise a family.
So when we think of a traditional farm and we think about everything that has to go with that farm, we think of the red buildings with the white tops along the countryside. And as we're going to show in this presentation, that while we still have a lot of red barn structures throughout Wisconsin, that's not the only style that you're going to see. And as you could see in the video, Ryan and Lindsay talked about the average day of the farmer. You know, most of them are getting up early in order to milk. Some farms are milking 2 times a day, some are milking 3 times a day. Matt will talk later in the presentation about how some of those are actually using robots in order to do the milking process. So again, while we think of this red structure as the typical barn structure within Wisconsin, it is not the main or the only structure that we're going to see.
Well, Heather, I think I agreed to take this slide. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right. So I just have to mention that that wonderful video we had. I see Lindsay Prawl is in the audience participating. So maybe Heather and I should both yield, and Lindsay can, no, we wouldn't do that to her. But thank you for that, Lindsay. That was great. So we did this once before, so I'm impressed that we have as many of you. Maybe some of you saw us earlier and are just getting a refresher. When I wrote this part, the first bullet I did, among the highest labor requirements of all agricultural enterprises. And some of my peers, some of the other educators are like, well, is that really fair? Are you saying that dairy farmers are the only ones that really work hard? And that's not the thing. But dairy is a it very easily falls into a full-time occupation. If you think of some other types of agriculture, there's a planting season, a harvest season, beef cattle, which is also livestock, there's a calving season. And even though you probably want to be there and observing those animals daily, you may not be feeding them daily. You may not even be moving fences daily. But dairy is very intense on the labor side, very quickly goes to full time, milking twice a day, milking 3 times a day. And I think another thing that I'd like to highlight in this is we call it a dairy farmer. And that really is kind of a Wisconsinism or maybe a Midwesternism or the Eastern US. A lot of other areas, there'll be dairymen, dairy producers. And here in Wisconsin, and the Prauls alluded to this, you milk morning and night, but you have cropping enterprises going on during the rest of the day, all these different types of planting, harvesting, maintaining. And the West Coast style of dairying isn't so much that way. They strictly dairy, and they purchase all their feedstuffs and they can get really focused. But so we have that term dairy farmer because they farm and they dairy. So yeah, low flexibility because cows got to be milked twice a day, and it's not, they really should be milked 12 hours apart. So this is really hard for people who want to have a life, their children, and all the activities that go on. A lot of it's outdoors. Um, Even in a barn, it's not like an office environment. So a lot of people love that. You know, they don't want to be in an office, but certainly dairy farming is a kind of an outdoor in the element sort of thing. And then as far as risks, where you might be encountering people that show up with disabilities, it might be due to injuries because dairy farmers are exposed to tractors, harvesting equipment, wagons, lives. Dairy cattle are large. Dairy cattle are pretty docile, but obviously bulls are dangerous. A dairy cow, right when she calves, can be very dangerous. And just by the virtue of them being large, they can, even if they're not intending to hurt you, there's risks involved there. And so, why do people do this? I think the Prauls talked about that a little bit too. It's often a family operation. You get to work with your family, and you get directly rewarded for your efforts in your business. And a lot of people would like to have their own small business. And so, a dairy farm is actually a very fits on that list of things a person could do that would be your own enterprise. So, and yes, Heather?
Sorry, I
Oh,
was clearing my throat.
clearing your throat. So we saw this already. It was already mentioned. Repetition is not a bad thing. The milking is this thing 2 to 3 times a day. And as cattle are getting higher production, we see more of these are 3 times a day sort of situations. But certainly, it's definitely got to be very, very few farms. You can find a farm in the country that seasonally only milks once a day. They're very rare. Most cows are milked twice a day. They're fed multiple times a day, and cows make a lot of manure. They're eating a lot, and so there's a lot of manure removal, putting down bedding to keep those cattle hygienic. Lindsay mentioned the part about you need to produce quality milk. So they're being evaluated on the bacteria count of their milk, the somatic cells, which would be absence of udder infection. So very high standards that way. They're also raising their own replacements. This has become a very valuable thing. If you've ever been to the bought beef in the grocery store these days, it's very expensive, and that also reflects onto dairy farmers and the value of their replacement animals, because eventually at the end of the life of a dairy animal, they also become part of the beef enterprise. So we raise heifers. We grow, we're in harvest right now. We've been in fall harvest, in summer we harvest hay. But this time of year, corn silage, corn, high moisture corn, soybeans, tillage, planting cover crops. Again, a very busy time of the year. And also a time of the year that we hear a lot about farmers on the road. And we got to be respectful of their equipment. It doesn't move fast, and they can't really change that. And they're trying to make a living. And a lot of us are preoccupied driving and just forget about farmers showing up there. And so we have too many unfortunate accidents happen that way too. Farm equipment, farmer accidents with vehicles. Um, Fixing and repairing, you're doing your own fixing and repairing often. So that is another unique thing of a dairy farmer is they are really multi-skilled. They have to be quasi-veterinarian. They do hire veterinarians, but they have to be good at animal health, nutrition. It's their own business, so they got to be good at their finances. And actually, very few of us are good at all of these things, right? But another one would be somebody in the shop that can keep a piece of equipment running, even if it's not working perfectly. And then there still is office work. There's taxes to report. Maybe they have employees and they need to report on all the things in withholding and things like that. And certainly enterprise keeping track of if this business is headed the right way. So many, many things these people are asked to do in a day's time.
So there's some assumptions that we make when we talk about dairy farms. So when we think about that red barn structure, that traditional farming system that we think about, it's normally run by a husband and a wife. Maybe, a couple of the kids are helping out while they're at home. And with this type of structure, it's a little bit harder for individuals with disabilities because they're doing everything. right? They're doing all the chores, they're doing the milking, they're doing the cropping, and the structures, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, are typically either a tie stall barn or a stanchion barn. So not like the parlor system like we saw in the video with the prauls. So they're having to kneel down next to the cows in order to get that milk out of them. So if they're having any disability issues with mobility, then sometimes we see this as a little bit more of a challenge in that traditional farming system. When we start getting larger, getting more into those modernized facilities, I believe we've heard the term freestall barn or freestalls already in this presentation, but we'll get into it a little bit more later, describing what that is and with a picture. But it's you tend to have more labor, more employees, and so you can diversify like the labor in which you're doing. So an individual with a disability can actually pick out those, like maybe they're able to feed calves, but they're not able to get down in the parlor and milk the cows. So there's some advantages to being a little bit larger and still having that ability to be able to milk. So the next thing we're going to talk to, and we've been alluding to it, is the different types of dairy enterprises. And so if we're going to start with that traditional dairy farm, all right, in the traditional dairy farm, it's all family is doing the labor. So it's that husband and wife, maybe with a child coming back to the farm, but it's that immediate family that we're talking about with the traditional farm. There tends to be no backup. So if like the husband gets sick or the wife gets sick, then that other spouse is responsible for finishing the milking and all the chores on their own. You know, maybe they have a child at home that can help, but most of the time it's that core family that is responsible for doing all of the chores. Typically the same individuals are going to handle all of this, all of the different activities. So, you know, like you saw in the video, Lindsay was milking the animals, Ryan was fetching the animals, and then he came up and he was helping with the milking process. So they're all doing it, they're all feeding. You know, maybe it's a division of, okay, I'm going to take the calves, you go start the planting in the field, but they're doing it. They're the ones that are in charge of it. The typical terminology that we hear of is going to be that stanchion barn, tie stall barn, and we have some pictures of these coming up so you can see those. But in these barns, the cows are typically restrained. They're milked and fed in the same location. And then we're also taking care of those replacement heifers. So those heifers may be out on pasture, they may be in another barn, but they may also be in that stanchion barn with the cows, depending on the setup that they have. When we talk a traditional family farm, we're talking about that 25 to 100 cows. Once we get over that 100 cow mark, we're starting to bring in some employees and having some help. So typically think about that 25 to 100 cow when we're talking about that core husband-wife team. So this is what a stall barn looks like. You can see the picture on the left. The cows each have kind of their stall or their parking slot in which they go into, and cows are creatures of habit, so they're going to find their stall and they're going to want to go back into that stall every time it's time to milk. So this is, you know, just a normal stall barn. Stanchion barns have like headlocks at the front sometimes. So the picture on the upper right is your pipeline system. So that's where your milk is going to go from the unit into the pipeline. And then because the animals are in the stalls, and you're at like that same level, there's no drop off like we have in the parlor system. There's going to be a gutter system in order to collect the manure. So that's what we see in that bottom right is just the picture of the gutter system there. This is the milking unit, which you could see in the video as well. The milking units are pretty similar no matter what structure or farm site you have. So here on top is another picture of the milking system, the milk line up here. And then the bottom left is where they're plugging into the vacuum to plug into that milk line. So here we're showing the feed alley. So again, you can see the milk line up top. So you know the animals are being milked here, but then right in front of them while they're being milked, they're being fed. So there's a little feed cart in the alley. So what happens in this situation, the farmers fill that one with feed, and then as they go along, it has like a little conveyor belt, and it'll kind of spew the feed out of there. Sometimes that alley area is too small and you can't get a feed cart through. So they're working with a wheelbarrow, depends on the situation, but this type of situation can be pretty labor intensive trying to get those animals fed depending on the barn situation and setup.
Yeah. So I'm going to just some thoughts to fill in on what Heather had talked about there.
Do you want me to go back?
No, no. Well, yeah, go back one slide. So she said sometimes barns are too narrow to have a mechanical feed cart like that. So when we talk about that hip roof red barn, a lot of those are a century old. So we've been the dairy state since Governor Hord in the 1800s, and so it's very traditional business. But if you're not growing rapidly and you're working with those traditional structures as technology changes, it's more difficult to integrate them into your operation. So that's why barns would be too narrow for feed carts, is when that barn was built, there were no mechanical feed carts. And a lot of these other things were additions as well. So, right, you used to get under the cow and milk them by hand. And now you see that white tube there, and there's a stainless steel tube there that handles the milk. That was an addition over time. Uh, the barn cleaners, once upon a time, barns were cleaned by hand. So uh, this system that you see here is a pretty high investment system per cow. So that's one reason we're seeing less of it is there's a lot of equipment and things there that need to be in place. And some of the more modern systems uh, are less expensive per cow. Um, so we talked about if you're in business by yourself, the inflexibility of time. And I know as a lot of you aren't dairy farmers, as a general consumer, there's a kind of a longing at times that the dairy industry should um, hold true to some of its best traditional values and not getting big. But if you see all the stresses of this typical family farm, dairy farmers themselves are voting out of this system because the quality of life is not there for them. Unless they got a lot of family, and I'm not saying these people are miserable, but they can be, right? You got to have a lot of a community around you to make this traditional dairy farm work. We talked about mom and dad and the kids. Well, there's also uncle and grandma and grandpa. There's a lot of things that need to be in place to make a system like this for people to have quality life. And then it can be really good, right? So family together and everything. But for many people, part of the reason to either get out of the business or get larger is to improve their quality of life. And I think if they could continue to milk 50 cows and make as much money and have as much benefits and as much vacation as everyone else in that they were, they would happily do it. But that's it's a business, and so that's just the reality that it doesn't always happen that way. That's part of why we have consolidation in the dairy industry. Now you can go ahead, Heather. The other one I wanted to allude to quickly before we get into grazing is these workers on these farms. I think just another story to tell you about the daily demand of this business is we hear about we have a lot of Hispanics milking cows these days, and on the larger dairies, a lot of the milking is being done. They're family-owned dairies usually. They're not corporate typically. They're family corporations, family partnerships. But on these larger ones, they do hire labor, and one of the things that we see very typical is Hispanic workers doing the labor. So a lot of us, when we think of Hispanics, we think of migrant workers, seasonal workers. That's not what they are on a dairy farm. They're everyday workers. And so sometimes the laws we have affecting those people need to be rewritten to address the dairy industry because there's a lot of visas and things for seasonal work, and it's not a thing in dairy. So that's another point I wanted to cover. So getting here to grazing. A lot of people really like to see cows out on pasture, and cows enjoy pasture. So it's not a very main system of dairy farming where it would be the main system of beef cattle, but it is a requirement if you're producing organic milk, you have to graze your cows to produce organic milk. Here we are the 1st of November. We live in Wisconsin. We have about half of the year that is not qualified for good grazing. It starts about 2 weeks ago and it goes until May that we aren't producing enough grass to graze cows. But um, we, in Extension, do talk to a lot of folks about benefits of grazing. Since you don't have to mechanically harvest and you don't have to distribute the manure and it's out in the nice weather, it can be a good system for cattle. But we always point out that not every day is 60 degrees and sunshine with a slight breeze. And so we do see on grazing systems that cattle often prefer the barn if they are given the choice to go out on the pasture or the barn. If it's cold or wet or extremely hot, the barn is a nice thing. It's got fans, it's got nice bedding. We do a lot of things to make that comfortable. But just acknowledge that grazing is a system in dairying. It's a very different system in it's not as mechanical, but we do have to know about fences and fencing and we fetching. I heard that in the video, bringing the cows to get milked. So it's a different set of capacities. So if you're working with a farm that's a grazing dairy, very, very often they're going to be organic. And it'll be a different set of responsibilities than what we'd call a confinement dairy. But most in the north, most dairies that graze also have some degree of facilities for their cattle to housing. They still have barns. So yeah, I mean, this is the idyllic part, right? Out in the sun, lush grass, lots of room, probably some insect control going so the flies aren't bothering them. But that's what grazing can be. But it also can be this. So I do some pasture walks with farmers. And one of the things we address when we're in grazing systems often is lane management. So you have to have some infrastructure to get water out to these cattle, for the cat to move the cattle. And let's say you got a well-established system and then you acquire a new pasture and you have to get a lane there. I will confess, this is on my farm. So if you don't have an improved lane, if you don't have some base and lift and mounding or maybe some added fill material in there, lanes can be messy and muddy and cows get dirty udders and it's not ideal. So not everything about a pasture system is idyllic. There's a lot of work and design to make them be really good systems. All right. So the prawl example was a freestall parlor system. This has become the main the way that most cows are milked these days. And a lot of people say, well, we wish they could get back in that old traditional where the farmer had the high touch, high contact with the cows, not um, this modern system. But there's one plus of the freestall system, definitely. It's free stall. These cows have a pen and they can move out around the pen at their choice. And just like Heather mentioned, they may have a preferred stall that they go to. They might still have that in a freestall system, but they can move about as they want. You saw the tie stall cows were tied or locked into a headlock in a spot. So this is actually a very friendly system to a cow that she can move about the barn. And we've been doing a lot of this since the 1960s, and we've improved the system. We often bed them in very comfortable stalls now that are deep in sand. Way back, they were just poor cows on concrete, and that was hard on their legs. And cows were not designed to live exclusively on concrete. So the freestall system also you can add more cows and not have to add footage of pipeline to milk and barn cleaners under them. So they're easier to expand, so they're well adapted to larger dairies. So there's labor efficiencies in feeding. The barn is never too narrow, right? The barn is, we drive by tractors and dump out huge amounts of feed in front of these cows. So it's become the prevalent system. There are variations. There are people that like a bedded pack, so there are no stalls. There's still a fence line that the cows eat through to get to their manger. But then there's usually like a scrape alley where the high traffic where you can remove more manure. But then in the back is a bedded pack, so the cow can sprawl out however she might want. So that sounds really great, but it takes more management. It takes more bedding. It's organic bedding, which is actually riskier for controlling mastitis. Um, uh, we see a lot of that in younger stock will do bedded pack, but that is another version of housing that some people prefer because of the great flexibility for the cow. These barns can be naturally ventilated, where the design is such that either the prevailing breeze or they have curtain sidewalls typically, so the whole side of the barn can be open. If you think about those old barns, they were concrete walls and they were built to keep warm in the winter, and in the summer the cows went out and pasture. But now when you have the cows in the barn nearly year round, we can do some designs that convection and so forth to help cows stay comfortable, or we can force the air through. And we have a lot of barns that are a combination of both. Some natural ventilation, some recirculating fans. They're called tunnel ventilated or cross ventilated, which depending on which way the air is moved through. And cows produce a lot of vapors, I'm going to call it. And so there, we need air movement. We need air movement to keep that air fresh, to not get too warm. So we physically moving air across the body. Cows are stressed by heat more than humans because they're 1,400 pounds and they react, they can tolerate cold much better than we can, but they don't like heat. Another version we can do is these barns can be automatically scraped with a alley scraper. So that reduces the physical labor of the worker. Or we have a lot of them where when the cows leave their pen to go to the parlor, a worker comes in there and removes the manure with a skid steer. So just giving you a bunch of the technology, terminology. This is a picture I took in the Netherlands. This is a floating barn in the harbor in Rotterdam, but it shows all the same characteristics of a lot of our other barns, that the cows are laying in some loose material. They have these different stalls. And actually, this one is a high-tech barn, so they have a like a Roomba. It's a vacuum cleaner type thing that's going to gather the manure in there too. So very high-tech thing, but it still shows all the other characteristics. But you can see the openness. You can see how the air is going to be able to move through there, naturally ventilated. So the PATs, the big blue tub there, that's a TMR mixer. That's a dairy farmer term, total mixed ration. So back in the red barn, the farmer dumped the hay, the silage, the haylage, the corn, the protein supplement, the mineral, that all had to be distributed. And then when Heather talked about that feed cart, that was delivering a TMR typically. So there was a room where all the correct ratio of all those things that the farmer's nutritionist formulated was put together to have the right protein and not too much starch that can make the cow unhealthy, but enough so that she will milk well, the right kind of fiber, the right kinds of protein, enough minerals. That's all formulated and it's thrown out there. And so we can feed a pen, it takes us, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes to assemble the mix. And then 10 more minutes to feed it out, and we fed 100 to 200 cows at a time. So it's very labor efficient, and it's very good for the cows. Cows eat where we as humans know how we should eat, but we don't. That cookie is there, and dang, it looks good. The cows don't get that choice. You know, they get a formulated ration that's healthy and well designed to keep them going. And this tractor-driven TMR mixer is the most prevalent way that that happens. So for you guys, access to a tractor or someone who's disabled that needs to get on some large piece of equipment is how I've often encountered people needing assistance for disabilities. So I think we had a lot of this with the milking systems, but the traditional barn, that was what we call a flat barn. But you could take that same barn and now build a freestall out behind it and then bring cows in and out repeatedly into that old flat barn. So there's less new investment there, but it's the farmer is still getting under the cow. So they're either kneeling on their knee, which can be very hard on the knees, or just squatting hundreds of times a day. That can be hard. But farmers, you know, don't always have the choice to go with a Cadillac system. So a flat barn is the lowest cost system. Then herringbone is what these others are what we'd call pit parlors. So the worker is in a pit and the cow is elevated. And so the worker can stand and be at arm length to where that udder is. And that's what we saw in the prawl example. They were working in a pit and the cows were elevated. And one style of that is a herringbone. So the cows kind of are feathered in like ribs off of the spine. So they're herringbone style. And so you actually attach the milker in front of the udder. So some farmers prefer that because they have more contact with the udder. But it takes more room, so more physical steps for whoever's doing that milking to work in a herringbone parlor. So slightly more popular these days. Herringbone was more popular at one time than parallel. Is this parallel parlor? So the milker gets put, the cows enter in along the pit, and they all have to do like a little curtsy sidestep to, and they know how to do it. To get butt even, udder even with the pit. And so then the worker puts the milker between the hind legs. And then we can advance that even a little more is once they're there and they're milked, we can have some nice hydraulic operated equipment that lifts the entire front of the parlor up so they can all leave at the same time. So we can milk more cows more efficiently that way. That would be a rapid exit system. A swing parlor would be let's say you can have 12 cows on a side and you got two sides. So a normal parallel parlor would have 24 milkers. But let's say you only have one person working in that parlor. There's no way they can keep up with 24 milkers. And it's more investment to own those units, milkers units. Heather called them units. So a lower cost system would be a swing parlor where there's room for 24 cows, but we only have half that many milkers. And so we put them on one side till that side's done, and then we swing over to the other side and put them in there. We see that a lot more in grazing systems, lower investment systems. And the swing is, we really did get deep in this when we created this, Heather. So a swing is typically a high line system. So the milk is through vacuum, lifted from the cow's udder up to a pipeline, just like in the red barn where the cows got milk in their stall. That milk gets lifted up. And that actually creates a little instability, not bad, it can work very well, in the vacuum as slugs of milk go up. And so engineers have decided that it's better for uniform and stable vacuum for those cows if the milk flows down. And so that would be a low line. So just terminology, if you're working with a farmer and they start throwing swing and high line and at you, if you don't remember this lecture, you can give us a call. But and then the prowl example showed an automatic takeoff. So there is a sensor in that unit that knows when milk flow has slowed. It's not good for a cow to be over milked. And it's also not labor efficient. It slows things down if the milker is just there. So we have developed pretty good systems with sensors that know when the cow's milk flow has decreased to a point, and we can tweak and adjust those settings, and then it'll cut the vacuum and remove the milker. So it's very handy labor wise, but it's also good for the cow. So most milking systems these days are automatic takeoff. And then I got in here a rotary or carousel. So these are, oh, you'll see some dairies with 500 cows that'll have these, but that's about the lower end. You'll see these systems milking thousands of cows. And so they're high cost. So, but they can milk a lot of cows with less labor very quickly. And so they're popular in these larger dairies. And cows really like them. So it's a big circle. And most of them, the cow's udders are pointed to the outside of the circle, so the workers are on the outside, but there are a few rotaries that the cows are pointed toward the inside of the circle as well. That is a thing. And you'll see that they could be 50 stall rotary up to 110. And so the cows actually enjoy that it moves slowly. So cows get on, someone gets them prepped like you saw in the video, cleaning the teats and so forth. Then someone puts the milker on, and the cows go for a little ride around the circle, like the hands on a clock, right? They circle around. It's usually about 8 minutes later, they get to the other end and they get off. And, cows like to get milked to relieve the udder pressure. And apparently they enjoy the ride. So it's and the workers don't have to move hardly at all. They just do their job there. So we still have in these parlor systems of any type, even though the worker isn't getting under the cow, we do have repetitive motion type stresses. If you're always reaching out like this all the time, putting on milkers, removing milkers, washing a cow, you'll get weakness in the shoulder. If you're doing that so we talked about twice a day or 3 times a day. On the large dairies, they're milking 2 or 3 times a day, but the milking may last to get all the cows milked 8 to 12 hours. It may be just about continuous milking. So if you have someone signed up for a shift in one of those systems, they're doing this 8 hours straight. So you'd say, well, that's not that bad of a motion, but do it continually for 20 years and be 50 years old, and you're probably ready to sign up for a different position. So this picture here is included on the left to help you visualize that pit structure a little better. So this is a parlor under construction. So you can see the workers would be standing in the middle there, and that fencing that you see in front there is we'd call it a man pass. So that distance between those 2 posts is such that a person could go through there, but a cow can put her head in there, but she's going to hit on her shoulders. And so they're going to build more structure up there that's going to show if it's going to be a parallel parlor. And this is a true pit that the workers are going to have to go down a stairs to get into that pit. A lot of the more modern pit parlors are that back end where you see the concrete wall. There are things you can do, like with the rapid exit system and how the cows leave. So this one is probably designed that one side has to cross over to the other side to exit the parlor. So that's why it's elevated on both ends. But if you have a system where the cows can exit back on both sides, then that front end can be not elevated. So So everyone's on their own level. The workers are on their own level and the cows are on their own level. But in this one that you see here, if the worker wants to leave the pit, they're going to have to go. They're going to have to go up a stairs. And then on the right, a very nice, very clean. It's actually a brand new parlor, and this probably looks like it's a parabone. So I didn't throw that term out at you before, but it looks like the cows might be entering at a slight angle, but not as much of an angle as a herringbone. And just all the crew that's involved in these modern farms. There's 3 or 4 people on a shift, maybe 3 shifts a day, people feeding cows, people feeding calves, people vaccinating or treating sick cows, someone maintaining equipment. It takes a community on these larger farms. All right. Then there's robotic milking. So I'm going to say I talked about how many of these cows are being milked by Hispanics. And we know that uh, immigrant workers are getting harder depending on our politics in our country to find people to do that work. And we also know that those of us that were born here, a lot of us are not anxious to be milking cows. So there's a labor shortage in the dairy industry. So one way to address that is have a robot milk your cows. And so robotic milking systems are very high investment, but they're a trade-off for the farmer between investment, capital, and continually doing their own labor or hiring labor. So they're pretty popular that way. And I think I have it, the third point there, somewhat scale neutral. So we'll see people going into robotic systems for different reasons. We'll see 120 cow dairy that's, as Heather described, it's mother and father, several children, grandparents. And the children are saying, yeah, we like farming. We want to farm, but we are not going to milk cows twice a day, every day, and brag about never taking a vacation in 40 years. We're not going to do that. So if you want us to come and sustain this family farm, let's get us some robots. So you'll see that system work for smaller herds. You usually get like a pair of robots and they continue about the same herd size. They probably have to do some barn modifying and so forth, but it's somewhat scale neutral. But we also see very large dairies putting in sets of 10 and 20 robots because they probably already have a parlor system, but they're seeing it's harder to recruit workers. And so they're very interested in robotics. So it's not as simple as a trade-off that I get a robot and then I don't have to do this work because robots need a lot of maintenance and you still need to be there to notice if the robot has a lot of computer power capacity hooked up to it. So you'll get reports. This cow hasn't shown up to the parlor in a while. Better go check up on her. Or this cow is down on production and you wouldn't know this because she's getting milked with a robot. Better go see if she's well. There's a lot of things that have to be maintained and the robots can fail in the middle of the night. The robots are working for you when you're at your kid's basketball game, when you're deer hunting, they're working for you, but they'll also call you up. He says, and they'll call you up at 2 a.m. Hey, we're failing here. Better come fix us. So they don't completely free the farmer from that routine work. They do give them flexibility. It helps a lot. But they still have to show up and maintain the system. And a lot of people like that. A lot of people don't like the farming lifestyle, don't want to manage employees. So let's manage robots. So that is a thing that, and we can roboticize rotary parlors as well. But the typical robot system we see is I think we have a picture of that. Let's go see if we do. So you're going to call this a milking room, boxes. So the cows Well, first off, that center picture, you see all the electrical things that are in there that are part of a robot. So it's sensing maybe if the conductivity of the milk, which can tell us if the cow has some mastitis or not. It's going to record for each cow how much milk she gave that milking, how much she does each day. So, and obviously on the right, you see this arm attaching part of a milking unit to an udder. So different competing companies have different technologies about how well they hook up to the cow. And um, we actually have to be very careful how we breed our cows these days, that they have the right teat placement and the teat size so the robot doesn't get confused. And the udder floor has got to be level and not too deep, and a lot of criteria to make things simpler for the robot. But the machine goes in, uses either a camera or a different technology, senses where the teat is, and tries to attach that. Um, and then you see on the left, we see where that milking station is, and we see that cows voluntarily decide, hey, I want to get milked. I think women who have nursed children know this better than other people, but apparently it's a thing that you want to get milked, right? You want to relieve that pressure. And we enhance this a little more with dairy cows as we usually put some very delightful feed in the milking station that besides getting milk, they get a treat. So some cows will be motivated, hey, I need to be milked, but they'll also be motivated, it's time for that really nice snack. And the gating you see around that there, the robot can read, the cow's got a identification on her collar typically, and the robot can say, oh, cow 1023, you've been here too many times for what you're milking. I'm not going to let you in. So the robot also does that. So not only does it tell farmers the cows that haven't shown up, but it'll reject cows that have shown up too often. And then it gets to be quite an art for the farmer. How much of that candy type treat should they offer? Because they can have a whole schedule that really high producing cows get more of that treat, lower producing cows get less of that treat. And then they have to work with their nutritionists. Am I going to use a cheaper treat or a more expensive treat? One that doesn't crumble too much that I have to clean out the bowl where the treat gets dispensed. So there's a whole set of different considerations for managing these robot systems. Hey, we're at the end. With 7 minutes left, it says here for any questions.